Have you ever felt trapped in a life that wasn't yours? That's what happened to me. If you've ever had to choose between loyalty to family and loyalty to yourself, listen to this story now. My journey from our family farm to discovering a life-changing secret will leave you wondering, would you have made the same choices I did? My name is Robert Anderson, and I never thought I'd be sharing this story with anyone. I grew up in a small farming town called Oak Ridge in Nebraska, where everyone knew everyone's business, or at least they thought they did. Our family farm had been passed down for 4 generations, a legacy my father, Thomas Anderson, reminded me of every single day since I was old enough to hold a pitchfork. I was the eldest of 3 sons, born on a stormy April night in 1982, when the rain came down so hard it nearly flooded our fields. My mother, Elizabeth, always said it was an omen, that I came into this world fighting against forces of nature, and that's exactly how I'd live my life. If only she knew how prophetic those words would become. My brothers, James and William, were always more suited to farm life than I was. They embraced the early mornings, the physical labor, the connection to the land. But me, I would often find myself staring at the horizon, wondering what lay beyond those endless fields of corn and wheat. My father noticed this, of course. "The land doesn't respect dreamers, Robert," he would say, his weathered hands gripping my shoulders so tight I could feel the calluses through my shirt. "It respects workers," and work I did. Every day from dawn till dusk, I tended to the crops, repaired equipment, and cared for the livestock. But my heart wasn't in it. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would sneak out to our barn with a flashlight and read books about art, architecture, distant cities, and different ways of living. Mrs. Patterson, our town librarian, would save special books for me. She was one of the few people who seemed to understand that I was different, that I was suffocating in Oak Ridge. "You have a brilliant mind, Robert," she told me once when I was 17. "Don't let it wither here if that's not what you want." Her words planted a seed in me, one that would take years to fully bloom. Life continued this way until I turned 21. That summer was particularly harsh, with a drought that threatened to destroy half our crops. My father became increasingly tense, drinking more than usual and lashing out at the smallest provocations. My mother, always the peacekeeper, grew quieter with each passing day, her once bright eyes now constantly ringed with worry. One night, after a particularly heated argument about irrigation techniques, my father stormed out to check on the eastern fields. My mother sat at our kitchen table, her hands trembling as she nursed a cup of tea that had long gone cold. "Mom," I said, sitting across from her, "are you okay?" She looked up at me, and for a moment it was like she was seeing a ghost. "You look so much like him," she whispered. "Like Dad?" I asked, confused. My father and I had always been told we looked nothing alike. I'd always assumed I took after her side of the family. She shook her head slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "No, Robert, not like your father." Those 5 words changed everything. Over the next hour, with the crickets chirping outside our window and the old grandfather clock ticking in the corner, my mother revealed a truth she had kept buried for over 2 decades. Thomas Anderson was not my biological father. "His name was David Mitchell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was passing through Oak Ridge on his way to California. He was an architect, so full of dreams and plans to change the world through his designs." She explained how they had met when she was working at the local diner, how they had fallen in love over the course of a summer, and how he had asked her to come with him to San Francisco. "But I was afraid," she admitted, "afraid to leave everything I knew. And then I found out I was pregnant with you." She told me how David had given her an address where she could reach him, how he had promised to wait for her. But when she finally found the courage to contact him 2 months later, the letter came back unopened. By then, Thomas, who had always had feelings for her, had proposed, offering to raise me as his own. "I made a choice," she said, reaching for my hand. "And Thomas has been a good provider, a good father in many ways. But I've always wondered if I made the right decision. If I denied you the chance to know your real father, to know that part of yourself, I sat there stunned, trying to process this revelation. Suddenly my lifelong feeling of being different, of not belonging, made perfect sense. I wasn't just an Anderson who didn't fit the mold. I was half Mitchell, a man who designed buildings instead of plowing fields. Is he still alive? I asked, my heart pounding. Do you know where he is now? My mother reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, yellow with age. I've kept track of him over the years, she admitted. He's in Chicago now. He has his own architecture firm. He's become quite successful. She handed me the clipping, which showed a silver-haired man receiving an award for a sleek glass building that looked like it belonged in the future. I stared at the photograph, searching for myself in his features. We had the same eyes, the same slight tilt to our smile. This man, this stranger, was my father, and he had no idea I existed. When my father, Thomas, returned that night, I couldn't look him in the eye. Did he resent me all these years for not being his blood? Was that why he pushed me so hard, why nothing I did was ever good enough? Or did he simply hope that by molding me into a farmer, he could erase any trace of David Mitchell in me? For 2 weeks I said nothing, carrying this secret like a stone in my chest. I watched Thomas with new eyes, noticing how differently he treated James and William compared to me. It wasn't just my imagination. There had always been a distance between us, an invisible barrier I could never break through. During those 2 weeks, I also researched David Mitchell. The internet connection at our local library was painfully slow, but I managed to find articles about his work, interviews where he discussed his philosophy of creating spaces that connected people rather than isolated them. In one interview, he mentioned never having children, saying his buildings were his legacy to the world. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. As the summer heat intensified and the crops continued to struggle, so did my relationship with Thomas. Small disagreements escalated into shouting matches. My brothers watched in confusion, not understanding the sudden shift. My mother pleaded with her eyes for me to keep our secret, but the truth was burning inside me, demanding to be released. The breaking point came during a thunderstorm in late July. We were racing to cover equipment and secure loose items when Thomas yelled at me for not moving fast enough. If you put half as much effort into this farm as you do into those damn books, we might actually get somewhere. He shouted over the wind and rain. Something in me snapped. Maybe I don't want to get somewhere on this farm, I shouted back. Maybe I want something different with my life. Something different? He scoffed. Like what? You think you're too good for honest work? For your family's legacy? It's not my legacy. The words escaped before I could stop them, hanging in the air between us like lightning. Thomas froze, the rain streaming down his face. What did you say? In that moment, I knew there was no going back. I know the truth, I said, my voice calmer now. I know about David Mitchell. I know he's my real father. The color drained from Thomas's face. For a moment I thought he might hit me. Instead he turned away, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Get inside, he said quietly. This conversation isn't for the middle of a storm. That night, the three of us, Thomas, my mother, and I, sat at our kitchen table while James and William slept upstairs, unaware that our family was fracturing beneath them. Thomas admitted that he had always known I wasn't his biological son, but he had chosen to raise me as his own. I loved your mother, he said simply. And when you were born, I loved you too. I still do. But I won't lie and say it's been easy. Every time I look at you, I see him, the man who nearly took everything from me. I never meant to hurt either of you, my mother said, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone. I understood then that they had both been trapped in their own way. My mother by her fear of the unknown, Thomas by his pride and his love for a woman who had loved another man first. And I had been caught in the middle, a constant reminder of what might have been. I need to meet him, I said finally. I need to know who he is, who I am. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. If that's what you need to do, then do it. But know this, whatever you find out there, you'll always have a place here. This farm, this family, it's still yours if you want it. It was the closest thing to acceptance he had ever offered me, and it nearly broke my heart. Because in that moment I knew I was going to leave. I had to. 2 days later, I packed a duffel bag with clothes and the $500 I had saved over the years. My mother gave me another $300 that she had hidden away for emergencies, and the address of David Mitchell's firm in Chicago. My brothers were confused and angry, not understanding why I would abandon the farm during such a difficult season. I couldn't tell them the full truth. That wasn't my secret to share, so I simply said I needed to find my own path. "You're being selfish," James accused, his face flushed with anger. "We need you here." "I know," I admitted, "and I'm sorry for that. But this is something I have to do." William, always the more sensitive of the two, hugged me tightly. "Just come back someday, okay? Even if it's just to visit." I promised I would, though I wasn't sure if it was a promise I could keep. The hardest goodbye was to my mother. She stood by the old oak tree at the edge of our property, the same tree where she had first met David Mitchell all those years ago. "I should have told you sooner," she said, her hands clasping mine. "I was just so afraid of losing you." "You're not losing me," I assured her. "I'm just finding the other part of me." "When you meet him," she said hesitantly, "please don't judge him too harshly. He never knew about you." "That was my choice, not his." I nodded, though I couldn't promise how I would feel when I finally came face to face with the man who had unknowingly given me life and then gone on with his own, unaware of my existence. The bus ride to Chicago took nearly 15 hours. I watched through the window as the vast farmlands of Nebraska gave way to the rolling hills of Iowa, then the industrial outskirts of Illinois, and finally the towering skyline of Chicago itself. Each mile put distance between me and the only life I had ever known, while bringing me closer to a future I couldn't begin to imagine. Chicago overwhelmed me with its noise, its pace, its sheer enormity. I had never seen so many people, so many buildings, so many lives intersecting in a chaotic dance that somehow worked. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city and spent that first night staring at the ceiling, questioning everything I was doing. Was I making a terrible mistake? What if David Mitchell wanted nothing to do with me? What if he had a wife, other children? What right did I have to disrupt his life? But the next morning, as I stood outside the gleaming glass building that housed Mitchell Architectural Design, I knew I had to see this through. I'd come too far to turn back now. The receptionist, a polished woman named Samantha, looked skeptical when I said I needed to see David Mitchell without an appointment. "Mr. Mitchell is extremely busy," she informed me. "If you'd like to leave your information, I can see if he has any availability next month." "Please," I said, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "It's important. It's personal. I've come all the way from Nebraska to see him." Something in my expression must have reached her, because her face softened slightly. "What's your name?" "Robert Anderson," I replied, then added, "but tell him it's about Elizabeth Carter from Oak Ridge." My mother's maiden name, the name David Mitchell would have known her by. Samantha disappeared down a hallway, leaving me standing nervously in the reception area, studying the framed photographs of buildings. David's buildings, that lined the walls. Each one was bold, innovative, beautiful in its own way. I could see the vision behind them, the desire to create something meaningful in the world. Was that desire in my blood too? When Samantha returned, her expression had changed completely. "Mr. Mitchell will see you now," she said, gesturing for me to follow her. She led me to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. And there, standing by his desk, was David Mitchell. In person, he looked older than in the newspaper clipping, his hair completely silver now, lines etched more deeply around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes, they were unmistakably like mine. He stared at me for a long moment, his face a mixture of shock and something I couldn't quite name. "My God," he finally said, Elizabeth's son. Yes, I replied, my throat tight. And yours. He sank into his chair, gesturing for me to take the seat across from him. I never knew, he said quietly. She never told me. She was afraid, I explained. By the time she worked up the courage to contact you, you had moved on. The letter came back unopened. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I had done countless times myself. I waited for her, he said. For months. I called the diner, but they said she had quit. I even drove back to Oak Ridge once, about 6 months later, but I heard she had married Thomas Anderson. I thought he trailed off, looking out at the city he had helped shape. I thought she had made her choice. She did, I acknowledged. But it wasn't an easy one. For the next several hours we talked. He told me about his life after Oak Ridge, how he had struggled at first in California, taking any job he could find while studying architecture at night. How he had gradually built his reputation, project by project, until he could start his own firm. How he had married once, briefly, but it hadn't lasted. My work became my life, he admitted. Maybe because I was trying to fill a hole I didn't fully understand. I told him about growing up on the farm, about my secret love for books and design, about the constant feeling that I was meant for something else. I used to sketch buildings in the margins of my school notebooks, I confessed. The teachers thought I was wasting time, but it was the only thing that made sense to me. David's eyes lit up. Do you still draw? I nodded, somewhat embarrassed. Nothing professional. Just ideas, mostly. May I see? Hesitantly, I pulled out my worn sketchbook from my duffel bag. It contained years of drawings, crude at first, but gradually more sophisticated as I taught myself through books and observation. David flipped through the pages slowly, his expression growing more amazed with each turn. Robert, he said finally, looking up at me. These are extraordinary. You have a natural talent for spatial relationships, for balancing form and function. This isn't just doodling, this is architecture. His words sent a thrill through me. All my life, I had been told I was wasting my time with my sketches. To hear from a successful architect, my father, that I actually had talent was almost too much to process. I never had any training, I reminded him. But you could, he said, leaning forward, if that's what you want. The question hung in the air between us. Was that what I wanted? To follow in this man's footsteps, to pursue a path I had only dreamed about in the secrecy of our barn back in Nebraska. I don't know what I want anymore, I admitted. I just knew I had to meet you, to understand where I came from. David nodded slowly. I understand that feeling. I spent most of my 20s searching for something I couldn't name. Maybe it was you. He hesitated, then added, I'd like to help you, Robert, in whatever way you'll allow me to. Whether that means supporting you while you figure out what you want, or helping you pursue architecture, if that's your path. I've missed 21 years of your life. I'd like to be part of what comes next, if you'll let me. His offer stunned me. I'd come to Chicago with no expectations beyond meeting him once, perhaps getting some answers about who I was. I hadn't allowed myself to hope for anything more. What about your life here? I asked. Your work? I can't just insert myself into that. My life has room for you, he said simply. More than room. There's a void that I think only you can fill. That night, David put me up in a hotel near his apartment, insisting that we meet again the next day. There's someone I want you to meet, he said cryptically. That someone turned out to be Jessica Winters, the Dean of Admissions at the Illinois Institute of Architecture. David had called in a favor, arranging for her to review my sketches and discuss possibilities for my education despite the late timing for fall admissions. These show remarkable intuitive understanding, she told me after examining my work. With proper training, you could develop into a very interesting architect. Mr. Anderson, Robert has never had formal training, David explained, his voice filled with a pride that made my chest tighten. Everything you're seeing is self-taught. Jessica looked impressed. That makes it even more remarkable. We might be able to work something out for a special admission, perhaps with some prerequisite courses to catch you up on the technical aspects. As we left her office, I felt dizzy with possibilities. You didn't have to do that, I told David. I wanted to, he replied. But the decision is yours, Robert. This is your life, not mine. I'm just trying to open doors that should have been open to you all along. Over the next week, I stayed in Chicago, spending days with David at his firm, observing how he worked, how he interacted with clients and colleagues. Evenings were spent in deep conversation, both of us trying to make up for lost decades in a matter of days. He showed me his favorite buildings in the city, explaining their histories and designs with a passion that was infectious. And I found myself sharing more about life in Oak Ridge, about Thomas and my mother, about James and William. Do they know you've found me? David asked one night as we sat on his balcony overlooking the city lights. My mother knows I came looking for you, I said. Thomas too. My brothers only know I needed to leave, to find my own way. David was quiet for a moment. Thomas raised you, he said finally. Whatever else happened between him and your mother, he gave you a home, a family. I owe him for that. His generosity of spirit surprised me. There was no bitterness, no attempt to claim me entirely for himself. Instead, there was an acknowledgement that my life had been shaped by many hands, not just his. As the days passed, I found myself falling in love with architecture, with the city, with the possibility of a different future than the one that had been mapped out for me in Oak Ridge. But I also found myself thinking about the farm, about my mother's gentle hands, about William's easy laugh and James's steadfast reliability, even about Thomas, who had raised another man's son as his own, despite the daily reminder of his wife's past love. One morning, as David and I were reviewing plans for a new community center his firm was designing, his assistant interrupted us. There's a call for Robert, she said. They say it's urgent. It was my mother, her voice strained with emotion. It's your father, Thomas, she corrected herself quickly. He had a heart attack while working in the fields. He's stable now, but James and William are overwhelmed with the harvest coming due. They need help, Robert. They need you. I felt torn in half. Here I was, on the verge of a new life, discovering parts of myself I had only glimpsed before. And yet, back in Nebraska was the family who had raised me, who needed me now more than ever. When I explained the situation to David, he surprised me once again. You should go, he said without hesitation. Your family needs you. But what about... I gestured vaguely at the architectural plans spread before us, at the life I had just begun to imagine for myself. Architecture has been around for thousands of years, David said with a small smile. It will still be here when you're ready. Family comes first, Robert. I of all people should understand that. I knew he was thinking of the family he had missed out on, the years he could have had with me, with my mother perhaps, if things had been different. Come with me, I said suddenly. Come back to Oak Ridge with me. David looked startled. To see Elizabeth? And Thomas? I don't think that would be helpful right now. Not to cause problems, I clarified, but to understand where I came from, to meet my brothers. And yes, to see my mother again, to make peace with the past. And maybe, I hesitated, then pushed forward, maybe to help me figure out how to balance these two worlds. Because I don't think I can choose between them anymore. To my surprise, David agreed. 2 days later, we were on a bus heading west, back to the endless fields and open skies of Nebraska. We spoke little during the journey, both lost in our own thoughts about what lay ahead. Oak Ridge looked smaller somehow when we returned, as if my brief exposure to Chicago had changed my perception of the world. David looked out the window of our rented car with a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension as we drove through the town toward the Anderson farm. It hasn't changed much, he remarked. Still the same diner where I met your mother. I noticed people staring as we drove past, not at me, but at the unfamiliar man beside me. News traveled fast in Oak Ridge. By the time we reached the farm, I suspected half the town would know that Robert Anderson had returned with a stranger in tow. My mother was waiting on the porch when we pulled up, her face pale but composed. When David stepped out of the car, she gripped the railing as if to steady herself. Elizabeth, he said softly, staying by the car, giving her space. David, she replied, her voice barely audible. You came. Robert asked me to, he explained. I hope that's all right. My brothers emerged from the barn then, their faces curious and wary. I introduced them to David as an architect I met in Chicago who's been helping me, which was true, if incomplete. The full truth would come later, when the time was right. Thomas was recovering in his bedroom, and the question of whether to tell him about David's presence hung unspoken between my mother and me. In the end, it was David who made the decision. I should speak with him, he said. Man to man, he deserves that much. My mother looked terrified, but she nodded and led David inside. I stayed outside with James and William, helping them with the afternoon chores, explaining about architecture school and the possibilities that had opened up for me in Chicago. To my surprise, they seemed genuinely happy for me. We always knew you weren't meant to be a farmer, William said, clapping me on the back. Dad knew it too, even if he couldn't admit it. Speaking of Dad, James added, his voice lowering, who is that man really? Mom looked like she'd seen a ghost when he stepped out of that car. I took a deep breath. That's a conversation we all need to have together, I said. But not until Thomas is stronger. Inside the house, David and Thomas were having their own conversation, one I would only learn about later. According to my mother, who hovered anxiously outside the bedroom door, there were no raised voices, no accusations. Just two men acknowledging the strange path that had brought them to this moment, and the one thing they had in common: care for a young man caught between two worlds. When they emerged, Thomas looked tired but strangely at peace. David looked thoughtful, his expression giving away nothing of what had transpired between them. That night, we all ate dinner together at our kitchen table. My mother, Thomas, who insisted on coming downstairs despite his weakness, James, William, David, and me. The conversation was stilted at first, everyone careful to avoid the elephant in the room. But gradually, as the meal progressed, something shifted. David shared stories about architecture that made even Thomas ask interested questions. My brothers talked about innovations they were considering for the farm. My mother actually laughed at one point, a sound I realized I hadn't heard in years. Later, as David and I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky, he said, I understand now. Understand what? I asked. Why Elizabeth stayed. Why this place has such a hold on you, even as you're drawn to something else. He gestured at the fields stretching out before us, silver in the moonlight. There's a peace here, a connection to something elemental. My buildings try to create that feeling, but here it just exists. I nodded, grateful that he understood. But I still want to design buildings, I admitted. I still want to study architecture. And you should, he said firmly. But maybe there's a way to have both. Over the next week, a plan began to take shape. I would return to Chicago with David, begin prerequisites for architecture school in the spring semester, and work part-time at his firm to learn the practical side of the business. But I would also come back to Nebraska regularly to help with the farm during critical times like harvest, and to maintain my connection with my family. And after you graduate, David suggested, maybe you could consider bringing your architectural skills back to rural communities like this one. There's a real need for thoughtful design in places that are often overlooked by big firms. The idea resonated with me, a way to bridge my two worlds, to honor both sides of my heritage. Thomas, still recovering but growing stronger each day, surprised me by endorsing the plan. The farm will always be here, he told me one afternoon, as we sat in the shade of the barn. James and William have it well in hand. They love this life in a way you never did. I should have seen that sooner, should have let you find your own way. You gave me a home, I said, the words catching in my throat. You raised me as your son. You are my son, he said firmly. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. Every day I chose to be your father. And that counts for something, doesn't it? It counts for everything, I assured him. The day before David and I were scheduled to return to Chicago, my mother asked to speak with me privately. We walked to the old oak tree at the edge of the property, the place where everything had begun for her and David so many years ago. "I need you to know that I don't regret my choices," she said, her eyes clear and direct. "Staying here, marrying Thomas, raising you and your brothers on this farm. It wasn't a sacrifice or a compromise. It was the life I wanted." "But David," I began. "David was my first love," she acknowledged, "and part of me will always care for him. But what we had was a summer romance, intense and beautiful, but not built to last. Thomas has been my partner for 21 years, through drought and flood, good harvests and bad. That's a different kind of love, but no less real." I thought about her words as David and I drove away from the farm the next day, headed back to Chicago and the future that awaited me there. I'd come to Oak Ridge seeking answers about my identity, about where I belonged in the world. What I had found was more complex than I could have imagined. I wasn't just Robert Mitchell, the architect's son, with an inherited talent for design and vision, nor was I just Robert Anderson, the farmer's boy, with a deep connection to the land and its rhythms. I was both, and I was more. I was the product of choices made long before I had any say in the matter, but also the maker of my own choices going forward. In the years that followed, I did study architecture, graduating with honors from the Illinois Institute of Architecture. I worked with David's firm, learning from his experience, developing my own style that combined urban sophistication with rural practicality. And yes, I returned to Nebraska regularly, helping with the harvest, celebrating holidays, maintaining the bonds with my brothers and parents. Eventually, I started my own firm, specializing in sustainable design for rural communities, with offices in both Chicago and Omaha. My first major project was a community center for Oak Ridge, a building that brought together the best of both worlds, innovative and beautiful, but also practical and deeply connected to the local landscape and culture. David and Thomas never became friends exactly, but they developed a mutual respect that surprised everyone, including themselves. They found common ground in their pride for my accomplishments, in their shared belief that I had found the right path by embracing both sides of my heritage. As for me, I no longer feel torn between two worlds. Instead, I move between them with increasing ease, drawing strength and inspiration from both. The secrets that once divided my family have become the truths that unite us, complex and imperfect as they may be. Standing now between the cornfields of my childhood and the skyline of my professional life, I understand that identity isn't something fixed or singular. It's a tapestry woven from many threads, some we choose, some chosen for us, all of them necessary to create the whole. So I ask you, if you were in my place, would you have made the same choices? Would you have sought out the truth, even knowing it might upend everything you thought you knew? Would you have found a way to honor both the family that raised you and the heritage you discovered? Or would you have chosen one world over the other? Between fields and secrets, I found my destiny, not by choosing one path, but by creating my own, one that honored the past while building toward the future. And in doing so, I finally found the sense of belonging I had been searching for all my life. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have chosen family loyalty or followed your dreams? Or like me, would you have found a way to honor both? Comment below with what you would have done in this situation.